Massachusetts Attorney General Andrea Joy Campbell is taking on a neo-Nazi group accused of engaging in violent, threatening, and intimidating conduct. The Nationalist Social Club, or NSC 131, allegedly disrupted LGBTQ plus events, targeted immigrant shelters, and even fancied themselves as thespians during a drag queen story hour, while violently disrupting the events. The lawsuit seeks to hold them accountable, proving that while you may hide your face and wear a uniform, you cannot always hide your wallet. Though reality often can be stranger than fiction, it can be far less entertaining. As the legal curtain rises, Massachusetts is determined to make sure this neo-Nazi saga doesn't get rave reviews. This story is from UPI.com by Don Jacobson on 8 December 2023. I have more to say as usual, but let's hear from the panel. And so, Kelley, let's go over to you.
Yeah, it's about time that law enforcement is starting to look at this wider array of alleged crimes of some of these neo-Nazi groups. I think a lot of us knew for a long, long time that these weren't isolated incidents, but they were a planned campaign of terrorism, even though we don't maybe see the planning above board. And I'm actually hoping to see even more lawsuits like this, holding the organizations to, yeah, they're actually holding some of these people accountable finally. Yeah, you're right. It is about ducking time. I often, every time I see these guys, you see them wearing the mask, and I know I've heard other people say it, but it always gets me when I see them, and it always makes me wonder. I'm sure it makes you guys wonder too. And at least the original Nazis, as assholes enough as they were at least brave enough to show their faces, but not these cowardly neo-Nazis. And why is it, right? Because they know that what they're doing is breaking the law. They know it, and they're trying to make it so that it's going to be harder and harder to find them. So I'm looking at this whole lawsuit as a really, really good thing. I'm really enjoying the fact that it's happening. It appears that the rest of America is pretty much just fed up with their baby crying. And, well, at least the people in Massachusetts are anyway, right? And we can only hope that this attitude spreads further and further across the country throughout the, next coming months and stuff. I'd love to see more of it. Scott, what do you got to say?
I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. I am happy to see that people are getting sick of this kind of stuff and are starting to either act or demand action. I think there's one thing worth noting here, in that the group is proudly proclaiming that they are neo-Nazis. They're out there wearing the costumes, they're doing the little dance moves, they're chanting their slogans and what. But if we want to talk about the good old days, what happened to the good old days where Nazi was like a bad thing, when they had to hide? That in itself is a troubling trend, I think. According to a 2019 Pew Research study, most Americans, 65%, including majorities across racial and ethnic groups, say it's become more common for people to express racist or racially insensitive views in recent years. A smaller but substantial share, 45%, say that it's become more acceptable. So we're seeing not only are these groups becoming more bold in their displaying, their messed up beliefs, but it's becoming more socially acceptable. We were just talking about how people are standing up, and I think what we're seeing there is some kind of division happening here. We have people on one side of the issue that are saying, wait a minute, these are Nazis. This is a bad thing. But on the other side of the coin, there's a growing contingent of people that are sympathetic to this kind of thing. And not only is it becoming more socially acceptable to be a Nazi again. And again, it amazes me that I would even say something like that. But those groups that are becoming more and more visible are also becoming bolder and more active in the things that they do. For example, this is a Government Accountability Office study. They released a report saying the number of FBI domestic terrorism investigations has more than doubled since 2020. And this report was released in 2021. Over the course of that 1 year, the number of investigations has doubled, and the number of open FBI investigations specifically has more than quadrupled since 2013. And so we're seeing this drastic increase. And, it's what we see here is increased social acceptability of hatred, increased willingness to act on that hatred, and of course, increased usage of growing technology to spread that hatred. And so, this is a very dangerous cocktail that we're mixing up here. And I think we have to. I think like you were saying, Kelley, there is room for optimism there as we see action being taken. But I think we also have to be more cautious. The old a drowning man is dangerous to be around, and because they get more aggressive in their efforts to stay afloat. And so as these groups get more and more marginalized by the population as a whole, they're getting bolder and more outgoing in their own little niche. And so, we have to be careful. Aaron, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't have any, I haven't ever been able to find any kind of studies or resources that show the source of why this is all happening. The one word that you said that I really glommed onto was emboldened. I think deep down, these groups are just emboldened by somebody who was leading this country who said the things that people were thinking. He was saying out loud the things that people he was saying the silent parts, right?
Right.
And so that really kind of emboldened people to start sharing what they actually believe out loud. And I think also social media can sometimes become an echo chamber where you're just surrounded by people that believe the same things as you do. And so that you kind of maybe think, you get a little louder in what you're saying because you're surrounded by people that believe the same things. I think what this group was doing to these events is pretty atrocious. They're out there. They purport to be protecting people from pedophiles, who they call pedophiles, but it's really just drag queens out telling stories. They think that these people are a danger to families, when in reality, the real danger to families are these guys themselves. They're showing up to these events in full-on masks, so you can't see their faces. They're armed, they're violent, and then sometimes they get into the actual event, and they're calling people names. They're aggressively approaching parents with kids present. Those can be pretty traumatic events for kids. I'll take a story hour by whoever's telling the story over somebody coming in who's armed, who's violent, who's yelling, who's trying to cause a scene, because that kind of violence that causes way, way, way more damage to people and to kids and to families than story hour, no matter who is telling the story. Jonathan, what do you think?
Oh, you're on mute, Jonathan.
I did do a little bit of a deep dive on this. First thing I did was I went to the actual filing of the actual suit filing, and I went down there, and there were just hundreds, it seemed like, of events, including the physical assault of two people who organized one of the drag story hours, and at the door, and one was thrown on the ground and kicked repeatedly. And nobody was arrested for that because they couldn't determine who did it, though they suspect. They need, of course, in our criminal justice system, you need to have better than just, well, he might have been. So that was one thing. But there were a couple of other things. That happened in Fall River, Massachusetts. And then they went up to Taunton, and they actually shut one down because they canceled the event when they found out that there were 20 members of this organization showing up. Another time there was a group of them that came down and started, but there was a police presence at that one. So they just stood outside the front door of it and congregated there. In the meantime, counter protesters showed up, and they started giving Nazi salutes to the protesters and screaming epithets and that sort of thing. And they started leaving, and then a few of them broke off and engaged the counter protesters, and a fight broke out, and the police had to break it up. I believe 3 people were arrested in that one. So they are trying, but again, they're cowards. They're hiding behind masks. This kind of thing is just, to me, is just absolutely un-American as hell. And that's probably not a really good way to say that. But
oh, I think that's an excellent way to say it.
well, yeah, but I don't believe in hell. But okay. But I think this is something that we all have to deal with. The normalization of this kind of activity at all, it really requires the intervention of law enforcement. It requires the intervention of the citizens in the area, just basically screaming at these people and telling them to go away. Because they actually believe that people will join them rather than chastise them, because they are getting, positive feedback, like you said, from the internet and that sort of thing. They call one of these groups the bully squad. Now, if that doesn't tell you what they're intending to do when they show up at these things, I don't know what would. So, their whole thing about these LGBTQ plus people promote harmful and degenerate lifestyles, such as homosexuality, transsexuality, and drag culture, in quotes. What is drag culture? Well, I don't know. Maybe RuPaul could talk a little bit about that. But I'm just, and the slurs they used, we don't need to know how that really gets under my skin. I mean, the fact there are Nazis openly parading around with Nazi regalia and Nazi flags in my country after I lost 2 uncles, and I had another uncle who suffered PTSD his whole life because of that particular war. I am like not a happy camper when it comes to these people. So I'm going to just go ahead and pass this to Kelley, because before I get a little bit willing to go into some of my diatribes. So, Kelley?
Well, I'm at a loss because Scott, when he brought up all those statistics, wiped out the second half of my notes. But
Ninja, yeah.
I was writing some things down real quick as I was listening to everybody. And Aaron brought up a really good point about the internet being an echo chamber and that emboldening them. And I think it's not just that about the internet, but it's also that anonymity and the lack of ramifications to being openly the way they are. Now, they can go out on the internet, say a bunch of shitty stuff, and then nothing happens to them. And I think that emboldens them a lot too. Toy boat, toy boat, toy boat. So I don't want to blame the internet for it. I don't think we should censor the internet or anything like that. I'm just looking at maybe these are some of the causes of the problem. How do you solve that? I have no freaking clue. I really, really don't. I like I say, I'm totally against censoring the internet, so that's not an option to me. And John, you said that this is anti-American, and I'm going to disagree with you. I mean, you go back to the know-nothings in the 1850s. This kind of ideals. Yeah, this is American as all hell. It might be against the ideals on which America was founded, but it's not anti-American in any way, because our American society keeps coming up with a bunch of degenerate groups like this, and we have throughout our entire history. So that's about all I could come up with on my new notes. So Scott, what do you got for us?
Well, I actually have another. You were talking about. You and Aaron were both talking about the increased use of the technology and the internet here. I did find a little bit. This is from a 2018 report from an organization called START, which is the study of terrorism and responses to terrorism. They found that far-right extremists were 43% likely to use social media as a primary or secondary tool in their radicalization process, compared to only 37% for far left groups and 36% for single issue groups. And so not only is social media and so forth enabling these groups to become more effective in turning people to their causes and whatnot, but it's a little bit lopsided. The far right is taking a little bit more advantage of this new technology than everyone else, and so it's troubling. We talk about it's easy to talk about. Well, I suppose it's easy to talk about the negatives. I was going to say it was easy to talk about the positives of the internet and the positives of advanced technology, but this is an example of one of those negatives. You know, I suppose in some way that could be part and parcel of having a free society with free speech and so on, but. You know, there has to be a line there. There has to be a line between free speech and harmful speech. And so it's interesting that we're now kind of bumping up against that. One last quick little tidbit here. In an August 2023 profile of the group that I found from the Boston Globe, they interviewed a former special agent with the FBI named Mike German. And he said this: our country's legal infrastructure historically doesn't see white supremacy as a national security threat. The groups that are prosecuted in far more lenient fashion than what we typically see in gang or international terrorism prosecutions. And so it's a little bit lopsided in the use of technology. It's a little bit lopsided in the use of law enforcement and being on the radar there. And so hopefully we see things change. I don't know. I suppose time will tell. And the best thing that we can do is kind of keep bringing it up and keep talking about it in forums like this. I don't know. Aaron, you got any last words for us here?
Well, I really like what you said about freedom of speech. And there's a difference between, I will defend people's rights to speak what their mind, speak what they believe, just as long as that speech doesn't become violent, doesn't encourage violence, doesn't encourage name. There's no name calling. You can get your point across and be kind, and be respectful to other people. If you think that drag queen story hour is a bad thing, I'm sure you can get out there with signs and get your point across without showing up with guns, without showing up masked, without showing up and kicking people and breaking ribs and things like that. So
you would think, you're not setting the bar very high there. Just don't hurt people. Just don't
How
hurt tough
people,
is that?
Right. That's where I draw the line. Speak your mind, speak what you want to speak. I'll defend that right. No, even if I disagree with you, but don't encourage violence. Don't encourage hate. These people are way more activated on the right than other groups are, and because they're out there and they're fighting their fight, and there needs to be people from the other side fighting the fight against them, and we just don't see that happening as much. And it's really easy for apathy to get a hold of us and just kind of let problems like this go by when they need to be actively fought against.
I think we're starting to see more and more activism come snapping back at them. It's not happening as fast as I would like to see it happen, but I think it's happening. And you were saying, that you'd like to see people at least be kind. I don't care if they're kind. I just want them to be civil.
Yeah,
right?
civil.
That's all I care about. As long as they can just be civil and sit down and have a conversation.
That's a better word.
One of the problems you were talking about, the prosecutions and stuff not really favoring them. I remember under Obama when the Justice Department did the study and came out with the statement that white supremacy was the biggest terrorism problem in the United States at that point in time, or the far right organizations were, and the GOP was up in arms over it, like they were being directly accused of being terrorists, which would never happen, But here was one of our two major political parties that was actually setting a smokescreen for it to happen.
Because that's their base, part of their base.
Yep. So, and I guess with that, if you'd like to keep this conversation going, check out some of the ACA social groups on the Facebook groups and on Discord. And if you'd like to see more of the nonprofits, you can click right here.